Welcome everybody. Today is another session of Conchas y Café, and we're broadcasting live for those of you joining on Google Meet from the park right next to the East LA Library. The Mobile Art Lab, as a little reminder for you guys, is here, usually set up and ready by like around 5 o'clock. So for anybody that's ever interested in actually coming and doing a little bit of work before Conchas y Café, you can come here at around 5 p.m. every Tuesday, and you can borrow one of the iPads. If you need to print your work, you have also the ability to print. And there's free Wi-Fi broadcasting from the Art Lab, so that is available to you all, and it will be making its rounds around the city of LA relatively soon. So, it's going to be expanding a couple more days out of the week. Today, we have actually two quotes. You guys know how much I like to use our quotes here. And the first one comes from Hippocrates. If you're, not familiar with who Hippocrates is an ancient Greek physician considered the father of medicine and the founder of the Hippocrates School of Medicine. You've probably heard of the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath is basically a promise that doctors make, that pretty much all people in the medical field make, to say that they are always going to do what they can to help nurture the patient. And as you can see here, Hippocrates, he wrote, he said, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. Que la comida sea su medicina y la medicina sea su comida." Y como dije, él se considera como el padre de la medicina, y fue el fundador de la Escuela de Medicina Hipocrática. Y para mí, pues, esta cita es algo interesante. I think that this is a very common idea that people typically think about. Earlier we were talking about spicy foods, and you are what you eat. But what do you all think? Is food really a kind of medicine? And obviously, is medicine a kind of food? What are your thoughts? I think another thing that came up is like our mental clarity, and not just our mental health, but like the idea of our fatigue, and if we are malnourished, sometimes it's harder for us to process certain things. I know in Spanish we have a phrase or a saying that says something along the lines of ¿cómo entran las letras si la barriga está vacía? Basically, is how can you take in information if your stomach is empty? That's one of the reasons why breakfast programs were started in low-income communities by the Black Panther Party, because they recognized that it was really, really important for kids to eat before going to school, so that they could actually, process things as they were there. So, yeah, exactly as San Juanita says, kids can't learn when their basic needs are met. So, the second quote that we have for today comes from Mahatma Gandhi, someone that I'm sure all of you have heard of at least once before. And Mahatma Gandhi is, very, very well known for his fasting. He was one of those people that used fasting as a way to basically show to the world the importance of his political cause. He was fasting because he wanted India to have its independence from Britain. But he also, I think, was very well aware of the importance of food, and social equality in a lot of ways. And that's why he's quoted as saying, "There are people in the world so hungry that God cannot appear to them except in the form of bread." Y aquí los traducí para decir, hay gente en el mundo tan hambrienta que Dios no se les puede aparecer menos que en forma de pan. Think about that for a moment. There are people in the world so hungry that God cannot appear to them except in the form of bread. the importance of food in our everyday life. Something that a lot of times we take for granted. And it's not until we're reminded of its value and of its importance. Because not everybody has it. Not everybody has it in the same way that we might have it. And even when we do have it, maybe it's not necessarily always the most beneficial to us. Think of like food deserts, and think of how expensive it is to buy something that's considered organic. Organic foods are sometimes twice as expensive as non-organic foods. It says a lot about just society, our culture, the things that we value. Um, you know, yeah, like Mauricio says, dollar menu versus ordering a salad. The dollar menu at McDonald's has a bunch of, I'm not going to say that they're not delicious, but a bunch of good foods that people feel are nourishing to them in the moment, but in reality, long term, are they really? Are they really the most healthy and most beneficial thing when you have to spend almost twice as much on a salad? Something that is considered to be healthy. So, yeah, very important things for us to consider as we look at the rest of our handout. First, we got a couple of keywords here that I want us to think about. The first one is transfiguration. Transfiguración. Un cambio en forma o apariencia. Metamorphosis. Right? It's also defined as an exalting, glorifying, or spiritual change. Transfiguration is normally something that's associated with the like when Christ rose again, from the dead. This is also something that I think is associated with the cuando se toma la hostia, when you're doing your communion. Right? There's also the concept of hyperbole. Right? Hyperbole is something that's extravagant. It's an exaggeration that is extravagant. There's also language that describes something as better or worse than it really is. Right? These two concepts are concepts that maybe, and I'm saying maybe, they might be opposites. Right? You could use them in different ways of thinking about or writing. Transfiguration is almost like the idea of a metaphor, whereas hyperbole is definitely metaphor, but hyperbole can be metaphor with almost like a tongue-in-cheek sort of attitude, right? It's to say something is greater than it actually is, or worse than it actually is. So let's think of that as we read Pablo Neruda's Oda al Tomate. Oda al Tomate. La calle se llenó de tomates, mediodía, verano. La luz se parte en dos mitades de tomate. Corre por las calles el jugo. En diciembre se desata el tomate. Invade las cocinas, entra por los almuerzos, se sienta reposado en los aparadores, entre los vasos, las mantequilleras, los aleros azules. Tiene luz propia, majestad venina. Debemos, por desgracia, asesinarlo. Se hunde el cuchillo en su pulpa viviente. Es una roja víscera, un sol fresco, profundo, inagotable. Llena las ensaladas de chile. Se casa alegremente con la clara cebolla. Y para celebrarlo, se deja caer aceite, hijo esencial del olivo, sobre sus hemisferios entreabiertos. Agrega la pimienta su fragancia, la sal su magnetismo. Son las bodas del día. El perejil levanta banderines. Las papas hierven vigorosamente. El asado golpea con su aroma en la puerta. Es hora, vamos. Y sobre la mesa, en la cintura del verano, el tomate, astro de tierra, estrella repetida y fecunda, nos muestra sus circunvoluciones, sus canales, la insignia lentitud y la abundancia sin hueso, sin coraza, sin escamas ni espinas, nos entrega el regalo de su color fogoso y la totalidad de su frescura. Ode to Tomatoes. And this is a translation by Margaret Sayers Bevin. The street filled with tomatoes midday, summer. Light is halved like a tomato. Its juice runs through the streets. In December, unabated, the tomato invades the kitchen. It enters at lunchtime, takes its ease on countertops, among glasses, butter dishes, blue salt cellars. It sheds its own light, benign majesty. Unfortunately, we must murder it. The knife sinks into living flesh, red, visceral, a cool, sun, profound, inexhaustible, populates the salads of Chile. Happily, it is wed to the clear onion, and to celebrate the union, we pour oil, essential child of the olive, onto its halved hemispheres. Pepper adds its fragrance, salt its magnetism. It is the wedding of the day. Parsley hoists its flag. Potatoes bubble vigorously. The aroma of the roast knocks at the door. It's time. Come on. And on the table, at the midpoint of summer, the tomato, star of earth, recurring and fertile star, displays its convolutions, its canals, its remarkable amplitude and abundance. No pit, no husk, no leaves or thorns. The tomato offers its gift of fiery color and cool completeness. You get this hyper importance for something very meaning. And Mauricio, I think, was picking up on the concept of transfiguration, and that something as mundane as a tomato can be elevated and transformed in front of our eyes, right? Yeah, you're cutting in and out a little bit there, Miss Michelle, but I think that I've heard of the tomato and mayonnaise sandwich before, as kind of like a what's it called, an appetizer sort of dish. And I've also heard of just simple mayonnaise sandwich. And it reminds me of when I was little, how there were actually a lot of things that we used to eat, me and my brother, because we really didn't have a lot of food available to us. And one of those things was white bread and chips, Doritos, or like just whatever we had available to us, because there was nothing else in the house. And yeah, like it sort of reminds me of the conversation we were having about what it's like to be so appreciative of food when you don't have it. And the reason why we're comparing Transfiguration and Hyperbole is because who are we really to say that this isn't just Pablo Neruda being facetious, and using hyperbole to make the tomato stand out as something that we can't live without, right? But it's also, I think, a good example of the concept of transfiguration, where you completely transform something to almost a spiritual level, right? There's a lot of different ways in which we can interpret the poem, and I think there's definitely language that we can choose to use in our poetry to either represent the concept of transfiguration or the concept of hyperbole. And the truth is, and this is just my opinion, but I believe that you need to have hyperbole in order to be able to transfigure something, right? Because the tomato by itself, it's kind of mundane. It's really difficult, I think, to describe a tomato in a way where it doesn't start to become, grander than it is, more extravagant than it is. If you're going to write ode, at least. I think all of these questions are good questions. And that is part of analyzing poetry, right? Is that you want to try and understand it for yourself first. And if that means doing a little bit of historical research about the poem, the context, then maybe that might be the useful way for you to understand how to use these tools that we're talking about. You're actually spot on in that his political affiliations were definitely socialist, communist, and his whole series. I think this answers one of the questions that I saw in the chat about him having other odes. He did do other odes. He did the Oda al Limon, which is the ode to the lime. He did Oda al Alcachofa, which is an ode to the artichoke. And he did this whole other series called the Odas Elementales, so the elemental odes. He, if I remember correctly, he wrote all of those elemental odes actually when he was exiled from Chile. He was a political, diplomat, as we saw in his little mini bio. But because of his ideas regarding communism, during the 70s, when the Chilean state was overthrown by the conservative side of the government, he was forced to leave, and during that time period, I believe, was when the Odas Elementales was written. And the ideas that I think he was trying to express in, elevating these basic ideas, these basic elements of, bread. He did an ode to bread. He did an ode to asparagus, or the artichoke, and all of these other ones. I think what Hani was saying about them being these mundane things that are now elevated to a level of hyper importance, is a way of him reflecting the importance of the basic working class, the importance of the campesino, the person that actually produces our food, the importance of all of these things to even culture and society. The poem talks about the asado, right? And the barbecue, the roast, as it was translated. That's a very strong cultural thing, especially for South America. All of those things are like they're intermingling, right? And I think what helps in the sense of the poem is when you talk about a basic component like the tomato, and you talk about it in the context of the larger culture and significance that it has to, the foods that we eat, to the rituals that we practice. I don't think that it was an accident that he mentions the asado. I don't think that it was an accident that he talks about, the other things that the tomato is mixed with, like, the onion and the parsley. All of those things, they are parts of a larger idea, a larger, concept, a larger cultural, representation of not just the poet, but the people that the poem is for. So all of those things, they, yes, it might be a little bit of hyperbole. It might be him saying, the tomato by itself is sort of, I don't know, like this very basic thing. Doesn't offer much, but it's accessible, right? It doesn't have any thorns. It has no husk that we have to tear away. It's vulnerable in its fleshiness, right? It's easily murdered. Those are all things that he uses as, a way to say that the tomato is greater than what it actually is. He does use hyperbole to the point where it becomes transfigured, and it becomes almost a spiritual component to the culture of Chile. Something sumamente, I can't translate that word into English, pero es sumamente importante. It's wholly important to just the existence of I think, the culinary concepts that he's trying to suggest. Certainly, context is important, right? And the context of this poem, in terms of its history, right? It might be that it is about, the people, right? And Pablo Neruda trying to make a political statement. It could also just simply be about the spiritual nature of food and how it relates to culture, right? And our well-being. I mean, I don't think that a person could argue that the poem is an angry poem or a sad poem about the tomato, right? It's a very loving poem and a poem that I think reflects a sense of, um, I don't know, like well-being when it comes to eating. You know, I mean, he uses exclamation marks to say "vamos," "ya ya es hora," right? It's ready. Let's go. Like those are not accidental, right? Those uses of those exclamation marks are not accidental. And same with the construction of the poem. You know, the conversation about the length of the individual lines. Those lines are short for a reason. And it might be like what I think Abraham said, that it adds emphasis to the words that he's using, right? It brings an extra level of importance to, the to the martyrdom, right, of the tomato. Um, so all of those things, they do play a larger role in the way that we understand the poem, right? That by itself adds to this concept of transfiguration, this exalted transformation of something very simple. Obviously, Pablo Neruda is a master at doing these kinds of elevated, flowery language types of poems, right? But I'd like you all to really think about the concept of transfiguration and try and apply the concept of transfiguration onto a single ingredient, like a staple ingredient, to a dish that brings you happiness. It might be the tomato, so if you want to redo the ode to the tomato, feel free to redo it. It could be the chile. I know that for me, chiles are basically a part of every single kind of food that I make. But if it's bread, it could be an ode to bread. If it's pasta, it could be an ode to pasta. Um, but again, try to use the concept of transfiguration and apply that to a staple ingredient, to the foods that you cook that make you happy. A staple ingredient, yeah. So it'd be like a very key ingredient for, it could be a single meal or it could be multiple meals. It kind of depends. Um, but that said, it's just one ingredient. So you're writing essentially an ode to one ingredient that is important to the foods that make you happy. But think of it in the sense of transfiguration, right? Try and apply that concept of transfiguration and really make something or write something that is exalting the ingredient to a level of almost spiritual devotion. It's probably going to depend a lot on the food that you choose. There's other things that it uses, like the season. When tomatoes are in season, he talks about summer, and he talks about the winter. He also talks about how it's combined with other foods. So he doesn't just tell us, that the tomato is I don't know, this key ingredient. He shows us, right? You need to show us how it's used. So he talks about how it's married to the onion, and we celebrate that by pouring oil onto it, right? And then there's the perejil that's added. So he shows us the ways in which it's used. So that might help you as you think about how you're going to elevate, how you're going to transfigure your staple ingredient. That's your homework assignment for this week, everyone. Think about the idea of transfiguration and try and apply that to a staple ingredient in your typical recipes. So, yeah, I hope you guys all have fun with it. That's it for today. Next week, Abraham is going to be giving us our lesson. And, in the meantime, feel free to upload your work to Google Classroom. Those of you that did upload some this past week, I'm going to get to it throughout the rest of this week, and you'll be getting feedback soon. Yeah, in the meantime, buen provecho todos. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and we'll be speaking soon.